Neil.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Okay.
We're going to be friendly, right?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Pastor Neil, for your kind introduction. As he introduced, my name is Wayne, and I usually go to Global. My wife, Charlene, is actually one of the teachers for Kids Zone, so she will be downstairs possibly doing a puppet show for the children. And we have 2 kids, and it is my great privilege to speak here today, because right here is a special place for me and my family. I believe me and my wife got married right here. And actually, where Pastor Neil is sitting, that's where I sat the first time I met my wife for the first time. Yeah, she was singing here, and I was sitting there, and she came down and said hi. But unfortunately, I don't think I made a very good impression because she said she couldn't remember. So. Okay, I think that's probably enough about me. So today, as Anna mentioned, I will continue the series on the book of John and share with you what happened on Resurrection Sunday. The story is found in John chapter 20, verse 1 to 18. I do have it up here, and shall we read the first part together? Yeah, 3, 2, 1. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So, here in our story, we see Mary Magdalene coming to the tomb where they had laid Jesus' body. Now, Mary was a Jew, and they observed the Sabbath. So she could not visit the tomb on Saturday, which is their Sabbath, because that means she would be breaking the law. So it was on Sunday morning that Mary came to the tomb. Now, Mary came as early as she could. In the translation here, it says, while it was still dark. The original word used here means from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. That's pretty early. I don't think I've woken up that early usually. So here we can see a bit of the love that Mary has for our Lord Jesus. And now the question you might be asking is, why did Mary go to the tomb? Well, in the book of Luke, chapter 23 and 24, it says that Mary and the other woman with her gathered spices and ointments and took them to the tomb. They were wanting to anoint Jesus' body. Unfortunately, these ladies were too late. Jesus was not there. It was the other Mary of Bethany, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, who anointed Jesus at just the right time. And you can find that story in John 12. So friends, you know, in life, I feel sometimes there are some things that needs to be done at just the right time, after which it's too late. Sometimes we wanted to do or say something to someone, and maybe we think we'll do it later. Maybe, you know, the thing is, many times this later never happens. You know, it could be love words for our parents, kind actions for our loved ones, gentle compliments for our children. So, friends, let us make the most out of every opportunity to show our love for people before it is too late to do so. All right. When Mary Magdalene arrived at the tomb, she found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. Now, tombs in those days were different to nowadays. They don't have doors. What they have instead looks something like this. In front of the tomb, there would be a groove in the ground, and in the groove is a circular stone which is pushed in front of the tomb to close the tomb. From my research, the stone would have been 1,000 to 2,000 kgs. The groove was not level, but slightly sloped. So to close the tomb, the stone will be rolled down the groove and stop in front of the tomb entrance. This means it was more difficult to roll away the stone than it is to, so it was more difficult to close the tomb than it is to open it because of the slope, as well as the weight of a stone, of course. Additionally, in the book of Matthew, chapter 27, it mentions that the chief priests and Pharisees of the time made the tomb secure. They put a seal on the tomb, and they also stationed security guards to make sure that no one can open the tomb and steal Jesus' body away. So, in other words, it would have been impossible for anyone, including Jesus' disciples, to steal Jesus' body away. So with all this information, you can imagine how surprised and shocked that Mary Magdalene would have been to find the stone rolled away. Mary was probably thinking that some grave robbers had stolen Jesus' body, even though that would have been impossible as well. So facing a situation where she does not know what to do, she went and got help. She ran to Jerusalem to find Peter and John. All right, so let's continue with the story. Okay, let's read it out loud again together, shall we? 3, 2, 1. Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then, they still hadn't understood the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. So, by the way, the other disciple here is the Apostle John. When Peter and John heard Mary's report, they immediately headed towards the tomb. In fact, they ran. John got there first and looked in, but he did not go in. Peter came second. And as is typical of Peter, he not only looked inside, he went inside as well. John followed, and they saw the linen wrapping and the headcloth. They were probably thinking, what happened? It's definitely not grave robbers, because grave robbers wouldn't have bothered to leave the linen behind, let alone leaving them folded in a tidy condition. So I find it interesting how John devoted 3 verses talking about these linen wrappings. And the Bible then says that John saw and believed. So what did John see that made him believe? Maybe he saw something like this. On the left, the Shroud of Turin, believed to have been used to wrap the entire body of Jesus. In 1898, a photographer captured this image of a face on the shroud. I wouldn't go into the details here, but in my research, I did too much research. But suffice to say, there's an entire branch of science called syndonology, where you can find out more about this. Or maybe it was the headcloth that made John believe. It could be the way the headcloth was neatly folded up. Or maybe he saw this picture in the middle. This is the Sudarium veil of Menopello, believed to be the headcloth that covered the face of Jesus, showing signs of Jesus' suffering, but also believed to have recorded Jesus' face the moment he resurrected and opened his eyes. Or maybe it was a linen wrap. Two commentaries I read suggest that the linen wrap was arranged in a very unique way, that this linen wrap was lying precisely as the body had lain in them. They were not cut open or pulled off. They were lying there looking almost as if the body had evaporated, leaving an empty shell behind. Furthermore, in John 11, there's this description about Lazarus. When Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out," the dead Lazarus came out. His hands and feet were bound, and his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus had to ask the people to unwrap Lazarus and let him go. See, Lazarus needed help to get out. And I imagine that Jesus would have been buried in a similar way, like this image here on the most right. The fact that Jesus managed to get out of this binding of hands and feet means that Jesus was resurrected, not resuscitated. Maybe Himali can appreciate the difference. Yeah. If Jesus was simply resuscitated back to life, he wouldn't have been able to, get out of his binds, just as Lazarus wasn't able to. So Jesus was resurrected supernaturally, and his glorious resurrection body was able to move through the linen wrap without disturbing it, as well, as getting out the binds around his hands and feet. Now, the whole point of why I'm sharing with you about the open tomb, the linen wrapping, and the headcloth is to build your faith. You see, our Christian faith is built on the foundation of Jesus' resurrection. Without this being a true and factual event, there's nothing to build our faith on. So the point is to let you know that your faith is solid. The stone was rolled away. The tomb was empty. The linen wrappings were hollow. Jesus is alive in a glorious resurrection body. The lyrics of this hymn sums it up really well. God sent his son, they called him Jesus. He came to love, heal and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Yeah. Amen. That's right. Let's continue with the story. Mary was standing outside the tomb, crying. And as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angel asked her. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." I feel you can really see how much Mary loves Jesus. Not only did she came first thing in the morning, she walked all the way or ran all the way to where Peter and John stayed, and then walked all the way back to the tomb again. She was probably left behind by Peter and John, because Peter and John ran, in their haste to get to the tomb. So by the time she got back to the tomb, Peter and John had already left, so she's there weeping by herself. And additionally, I also think it's amazing how single-minded Mary is about Jesus. Most people we read in the Bible, when they see angels, they would fall to the ground, in fear, trembling. But here we see all that Mary can think and talk about is Jesus. Mary turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She saw he was a gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. She turned to look at him and cried out, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. Mary Magdalene had the honor of being the first person to see the risen Jesus. This is such a wonderful blessing and privilege. 2,000 years later, we're still talking about her. A question I wondered when I read these verses was, why did Mary not recognize Jesus? In verse 14, we see that when she turned to leave, she saw someone there, but did not recognize that it was Jesus. Some theories say that it's because Jesus looked very different. But I think the simple truth from what we read here is this: Mary, in her grief, in her sorrow, cried so much that her tears blinded her and stopped her from recognizing Jesus. Additionally, Mary kept looking at the tomb. I imagine the event was a bit like this. So imagine this here is the tomb, and this here is Jesus. So Mary was talking to the angels, then she turned to leave. She saw someone, she had a chat with them, but she turned back again to look at the tomb until Jesus called her name, and then she turned. So that's why in the Bible here it says, she turned. That means that she was looking at the tomb again. So when Jesus called her name Mary, she finally turned to look at Jesus. So Mary could not recognize Jesus because of two things. One, because of her sorrow and her tears. And secondly, because she kept facing the wrong way. She kept facing the tomb. So the principle here for us is to look away from sorrow and grave, to look at Jesus. Instead of focusing on our sorrow, we should keep our eyes on Jesus' glory. Instead of looking at the grave, we should keep our eyes on heaven. I'm reminded of a time 6 years ago when I went to 2 funerals in the same month. The first funeral was a family friend's. Their eldest son died in the prime of his life. The family were Buddhists. I remember so clearly the intense sorrow that was present on that day. Everyone was crying and wailing. And I remember seeing the tears and the sorrow of the family members, when they look into the casket and said goodbye to their son. For them, without the Christian hope, it is really the end. And the second funeral I attended was Ian Kemp's memorial service. Many of you will remember Ian, yes? And his wonderful ministry here at the TAP. In fact, he preached right here on my first Sunday. So it was 16 years ago. I always consider him as my hero of faith and inspiration. I remember how he used to sing when he preached. And Ian's memorial service was so different to that first funeral I attended. Yes, there were sorrow, there were tears, but so much more joy and celebration. The family was, clearly they were looking forward to the time when they will see him again in heaven. They know with certainty that Ian is in heaven, possibly partying face to face with Jesus in the glory of God. Friends, this is the hope that we have in Jesus. Continuing with the story. Don't cling to me, Jesus said, for I haven't yet ascended to the Father. But go find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, I have seen the Lord. Then she gave them his message. Verse 17 has a small potential to be hard to understand because it sounds as if Jesus is saying he can't be touched at that moment because he has not yet ascended to the Father in heaven. However, very soon after this, both in Luke 24 and Matthew 28, you find accounts of Jesus' disciples, Jesus asking his disciples, come, touch my hand, feel the hole there, to Thomas as well. And so Jesus is able to be touched in his resurrection body. So I believe the simple explanation here is that Mary, in her excitement and joy to see the risen Jesus, held him tightly and refused to let him go. I see a bit similar to my daughter. My daughter Abigail doesn't usually hug me, okay? Not the hugging type. But whenever I go out in the evening, say to Julian and Corinne's place, she would hold me so tightly and refuse to let me go. I would have to pry her off me, saying, okay, calm down, girl. Let me go. I'm not going yet. Go and grab a bag of corn chips for me to bring with me. So I see here something similar. Jesus had to tell Mary something along the line of, do not spend so much time worshiping me in your joy of finding me. I'm not going to heaven just yet. I also want to meet my other disciples. Now go and tell them the good news. And this explanation of verse 17 makes the most sense and is in fact what Mary does next in verse 18. And verse 18 says that Mary went to the disciples and told them Jesus' message, as well as this wonderful statement, I have seen the Lord. I was reflecting on Mary's life. Mary Magdalene's life was transformed so much by Jesus. Both the books of Luke and Mark says that she was previously tormented by 7 demons. One is enough. But Jesus healed her and set her free. She was there at the foot of the cross when Jesus died. Then we see her being the first person to see the risen Jesus. And here we see her being a messenger for Jesus, bringing the good news that Jesus is alive. So I feel the encouragement here is for us to be messengers or witnesses for Jesus, just like Mary here. And one practical way is to have our testimonies written down. One time in our home group, we did an exercise in which we all wrote down our testimonies of how and why we believe in Jesus. Things like how we were before and what we became after we believe in Jesus. An interesting twist was that we wrote down our testimonies in 3 different versions. One, a 1-minute version, a 5-minute version, and a 15-minute version for different situations that we might get asked about Jesus. And I feel this is something we can do to be prepared. So we will be ready whenever we need to share our testimony. And my hope is that for all of us here, that our testimonies will be, I have seen the Lord, just like Mary. All right, in closing, I hope my message today was able to build your faith and give you some practical applications as we examine the story of Jesus' resurrection, some historical evidences, and especially the responses of Mary Magdalene and Apostle John. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Wayne, for joining us today. And